Welcome to the panel. And we're going to have a chance for conversation. I want to make a couple of kind of gathering announcements, if I might. First of all, that as Bill said at the beginning of things here, we are still looking to fill out the cohort for the July week that we're going to be spending in Chicago and doing kind of an intensive but also joyful and interesting learning about adaptive leadership and about many of the areas of diagnosis and context and theology and reflection and community that our wonderful guests were talking about this morning. So by all means, if you are interested in that or know someone who might be interested in that, please let us know. And I'm going to let you know how to let us know here. Isn't that good? There's a new website called IAPS, as in Institute of Advanced Pastoral Studies, IAPSDetroit.org. And you can also it'll tell you how to give a phone call so that there can be some conversation around that as well. And now we have the opportunity to talk together as leaders and also be connected to you in what is an ongoing conversation that was so wonderfully begun and really inspired, that's the right word, by the three of you this morning. And I think we ought to, after lunch and also just in Thanksgiving, give them applause and a sign of our thanks. And I'm the moderator. I'm Jim Lemler, and in my retirement gig, I've been retired a couple of years, and I'm the president of a philanthropic foundation in Indianapolis that works with arts and community and all of that sort of stuff. But for the better part of 4 decades, I am guess what I'm dressed as today? An Episcopal priest, think of that. And did a lot of different stuff there in congregations for our denomination, and also share the joy and the wonderful scars of working in a divinity school and being the president of one of those particular animals. So, but we are here, so that's who I am. And we're here to really reflect in conversation on what we heard this morning and also on the kinds of things that emerge in perichoresis, thank you very much indeed, when the Trinity is talking within itself, 3 in 1 and 1 in 3. I want to thank you all for particularly the first part of the adaptive leadership kind of journey is that of diagnosis, and you all just did a remarkable job of diagnosis of the church, of our culture, a kind of theological diagnosis, a diagnosis of some of the human condition, and particularly the sinfulness that keeps us apart as a part of that. And we'll have a chance to enter into that diagnosis more, but you remember the next part of that then is inspiration and energizing people to read that reality truthfully and to be able to be a partner in diagnosis and also eventually in response in that way. So I want to ask all three of you, and with our eminent colleagues and leaders joining in here, the why do you get up in the morning question, which is, I'd like to know, maybe you would too, what energizes you to do this work that you're doing of ministerial leadership, of diagnosis, and of leadership? Why do you get up in the morning? And anyone can go first. And use a microphone. Here.
Snap judgment answer. I mean, 2 reasons come immediately to mind. One, somewhat selfishly, my children. And the second is because somebody did it for me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I understand that I am a product of so many sacrifices, including many of you in this room. And the scars that you bear, physical, emotional scars from living under structures of domination that you bore the weight from. And I look at those scars and I see those as your medals, badges of honor that made my life possible. And so I'm able to sit here as whatever I am, as a professor, as, you know, having had incredible privilege afforded to me. Because the work of so many of you, the work of my parents, the work of my grandparents, and communities and unsung heroines, heroes that did this work of we're going to pursue justice, we're going to love mercy, and we're going to walk humbly before our God. And so if I can do a little bit of that, to take my football analogy, move the ball down the field for my sons and daughter and generations yet unborn, then that's the rent that I have to pay to live here.
Amen. Sounds like a great cloud of witnesses that you are describing there, too. Either of you, what would, Christina, would you?
Sure. I think I would say that I used to get up because I was trying to meet the expectations of our white supremacist society. I think the last few years I've been on a journey, an adventure of excavating deep below all of the calluses and trauma and lies of our colonialistic white supremacist society to find the truth about myself and about the divine. And I feel like now I wake up because there's another surprise, another glorious surprise to discover. And it seems like every day I'm learning something truthful that I wasn't taught in all my education and Sunday school and, vocation.
Thank you.
Literally, I wake up in the morning because I can't sleep at night.
3 o'clock in the morning, the seminary president.
I was preaching a sermon when I was dean the first time at opening convocation, and I said, being a dean means you sleep like a baby, you wake up every 3 hours and cry. And faculty member came up afterwards and said, that was a funny joke, but I know that's not real. And I was like, no, it's actually real. But I'd echo some of what Jonathan described, because only it shows the difference in our ages, because it's your children, it's my grandchild. I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, and she's about to have a new sister who doesn't seem to want to come into the world because she was due almost 10 days ago, and she seems quite content in the womb. But I think a lot about the world that we're leaving, in my case, my grandchildren, and that worries me a lot. And so that's the selfish, but also just kind of reflective piece at my age. And then I'd say I'd combine what you said, Jonathan, about the gratitude for those who've gone before us, and in that sense. And then that also leads me to want to plant seeds or plant trees under whose shade I won't sit. I've been actually reflecting on that phrase and realizing how important that is, and yet we don't have a word to describe that practice or that virtue, except that phrase, which is kind of cumbersome to say. And I've been asking people all around the world who speak multiple languages and say, does your language have a word for that? And they keep saying, we're sure it does. And then, you get to generativity or legacy or something, but it doesn't quite capture the full scope of that. And part of the gratitude I have is recognizing that people started institutions and built churches and did things at really inopportune times. And it was out of that hope and that improvisation that led them to do it. And so, I'm getting to a point in my life, I've now already outlived my father, where I don't know how much more time I have, but I want to help plant trees.
Thank you. Starting with our two in-parish clergy here now, being a part of this. I'd like to take that to the other side of the leaders whom we, as practitioners, as leaders, and we raise up next generations of leaders to be able to have courage, to be able to be aware of their own interpersonal and personal context as much as the context of society. I was ordained 43 years ago last week. I was 12 at the time. And and given to me, I had grown up in a very high church kind of Anglo-Catholic setting and went to England because we weren't Anglo-Catholic enough here for my first theology stuff and all that sort of thing. And at my ordination, everyone gave me the kind of things that you'd have, wonderful holy books and the like. My great aunt gave me a chasuble that she picked up in Belgium, and also a life membership to the Society to Preserve the Old Prayer Book, you know, so it was, she loved me. But someone was kind enough to give me a brand new book, which was written called Stress, Power, and Ministry. And those words had not been uttered to me in seminary. And rather there was kind of this semi-nostalgic, semi-fantasy kind of view of what you did in this sort of thing. So the next why you get up in the morning question, in a time when there is such rapid change and transition and shift, whichever way you pronounce that, it works, by the way, shift in what we are experiencing. What about the conversations that you have in places where people are being formed and that parish-based practitioners have in recruiting and inviting people to consider this adventure and this journey of ministerial leadership? Why do we recruit instead of why do we get them up in the morning? Why do we recruit them and invite them to this life and this particular journey? Bill or Christian, you want to?
Well, you know, I had a congregant who was wrestling with whether he should go to seminary or not. He said, I could get a PhD in chemistry from Michigan State University, or I could go into seminary. I'm feeling led to go into seminary. He said, because God has called me to become a millionaire preacher. And I'm going to help a lot of people with all these millions of dollars. I said, young brother, please go to Michigan State. Pursue your PhD. Because I can assure you that probably will not happen. I don't want to say anything is too hard for God, but that's not the road we have chosen, right? That's not the life that we are called into. I remember Dr. James Cone said in our systematic theology class at Union, he said, you know, you've been called to suffer. You've been called, you have been called to bear a cross. He said, if you want to make money, go across the street to the law school. They're going to make money when they graduate. Go to the medical school. They're going to make money, but you've been called to cry. He said, and if you're not ready for that, you might as well get up and leave now. And about 5 people left right there. Now, I almost got up with them. But truly, we've had so many great examples. I know I have, I know you have, right? Or we wouldn't be here. And as Dr. Walton said, you know, these are the people who inspired us and sacrificed for us, you know, not only in life but in ministry. So when you see those kinds of hearts and minds and sincerity, you just know deep in your heart that it pays to serve Jesus, that it may not be monetary, but it is just as substantive and far more enduring. So I know that it's a contradiction, right? It's a paradox. And the more we empty out the vessel, the more we make room for the grace of God to come in. But I'll let Bill go ahead and tackle this.
Thank you. And this is a question that probably should be referred to all of us. And I suppose I want to enter into it just by saying why I get up in the morning is because I believe that I'm never more fully a Christian than when I'm making connection with somebody who is other than myself. And so for me to meet the person who is other than myself, it doesn't take much time. It is my family, or other than me, and then it is my community, but then it's my larger community. And one of the things that I found so powerful about being here in Detroit is I am always confronted by otherness if I am willing to open my eyes. And which means then I can have the opportunity to be a disciple of Jesus in those moments. And that's, and for me, that is about loss, but it's also about finding yourself in a more powerful way. And one of the great benefits, when I preached at Christian's Church, I was asked to preach about the 7 last words. It was, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And that was given to me in 2015 in the midst of the BLM. And I thought, how do I, as a white preacher from a Tony church in the suburbs, stand before the people of God and invite them into what Jesus meant by those words? And it was the first time I actually talked about being a survivor of sexual abuse and the kind of weird way in which my abuser came and begged for forgiveness from me. And I'd never spoken about that from the pulpit because I never wanted to be trapped by that narrative. But in that moment, I realized that I had to enter into that question through my own brokenness, my own vulnerability, through my own scars. Otherwise, there was no way that God could speak through me and those words could speak through what I would say. And it was one of the most healing experiences of my life. And so what I would say to someone who wants to be a pastor, it will allow you to find, in a way that few other fields will, the fullness of yourself. The fullness of who God has called you to be. And that comes in that dynamic interaction with someone so radically other than yourself. Because it's only there that you begin to see the grace that is God. And there's so few other fields where we can do that.
Yes. Think you. And for those who form leaders in the settings of where you are.
Thanks. I think I'm the only woman on this panel, but I think I'm also the only millennial on this panel. That's true. Right? Okay. I was born in 1980, so I like to think of myself as the oldest and the wisest of the millennials. I agree with Dean Jones that so much of the grand epic story and arc of the Bible was chopped into some rules around sin and conflict management, conflict suppression. And I think what excites me about inviting people into this story as ministers is that desire for story is deep in our souls. And if we talk about that story and we engage people's imagination and give them permission to imagine themselves, I'm amazed at how many people are ready to turn down the law school money, the engineering school security for this adventure. It's unbelievable to me to see it amongst my peers, to see it amongst my students who are some of them are even younger than me. And I know, like, speaking of 7 last words, this Lenten season, I, on my own, like, online space, went on a 7-week journey during the 7 weeks of Lent and walked Stagville Plantation every week for 4 or 5 hours, just thinking about what it was like to be a Black woman on the plantation. Stagville Plantation is the major plantation in the Durham area. And much of it is still there. And I, each week, wrote on one of the 7 last words, but I named it the 7 last words of Christ, our Black Mother, and invited people to think about, gosh, what do the words of Jesus mean in the #MeToo movement? Let's imagine that together. Let's allow that to infuse our theology. What do the 7 last words of Jesus mean to women, to Black women, here and now, back then? How does history and our sociological imagination impact the way that we read Scripture now? And I found that when we do that kind of work, people want to lean in, even if it means it's risky. That's all I can say, but I have a lot of hope about, I think the church will look different, but I have a lot of hope about the energy of the church moving on. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me ask a kind of follow-up question to that then, which is about energy as well. It's about the energy of people who are serving and leading, and the inspiration that they have. Recently, there's been some great work done in one of those Lilly initiatives, that is a part of a different part from what this particular initiative and project is, looking at how people stay alive in the work that we're called to do, and using the term, and it's a great term, resilience. What does gospel resilience look like? What is resilience in and of itself, and how is it empowered and nurtured for leaders? And there was a sort of trinity of things that were seen to be important for us recapturing and engaging and being empowered in our resilience. One was purpose, having a strong sense of what our purpose and our call is. And the other 2 were peers, connectedness and community, and practices. Thank you for using that word, practices, in terms of the way in which we form and shape our lives. And the research that this group was doing around resilience was finding that we clergy do come into contact with and have a pretty good sense of purpose, and find continuing education ways, like about adaptive leadership, to help us re-engage our purpose. But when it comes to peers and practices, there's a marked difference in our security and in our capacity. Would you like to comment on that? I sure hope so. No, what do you think? What do you think of that in terms of the connectedness and community, the beloved community of peers, and of the practices that allow people who are in a very rapid moving life and world to do ministry?
At Duke, we've had a longitudinal study that started in about 2007, I think, 2008, looking at United Methodist clergy in the state of North Carolina. It's supported by the Duke Endowment as private philanthropy in Charlotte. It was a longitudinal study looking at clergy health and well-being across the state. United Methodist clergy it focused on. But one of the things that they found was they found a number of disturbing things, but the largest driver of healthcare costs and premiums in the 2 conferences of the United Methodist Church were not catastrophic surgeries or major healthcare issues. They were antidepressants and other pharmaceuticals. And what they found was that United Methodist clergy were more depressed than the general population by a very significant factor. And of those severely depressed at high risk of suicide, it was 3 times as depressed. And when they started looking beneath those stats, and this was based on a 95% return rate on the survey, so it was a very comprehensive return rate, but what they found was a sense of isolation and loneliness. So the loss of the peer-to-peer connection was a factor, and that's partly because a lot of these clergy are in rural areas, and they feel isolated from other clergy, and the dysfunctions in a lot of congregations make it hard to know how to have relationships that are healthy with parishioners. And we've also gone through a stage that I think is highly destructive of telling clergy they shouldn't be friends with parishioners. I mean, there are complications and things, but when you say do that, then you tend to put up barriers that only intensifies the sense of loneliness and isolation. Conversely, when you were talking about energy and people who inspire, I mean, I've been looking at what's going on in economics, political science, lots of disciplines around the new localism and the significance of what change can happen in a local community, a local neighborhood, a region, rather than just staying focused on look at what's happening around the world or nationally. And that's an opportunity for clergy to be, and for congregations to be what I call catalysts, conveners, and curators. And when that happens, you see those peer-to-peer networks, you see the relationships. It means that we have to get off home court. There's a tendency, and this is actually one of the problems, I think, of seminary, is we teach students Bible, history, theology, etc., but it's all done on the presumption that people are going to come to us. So we know how to talk to lay people about coming to Bible study, how to come to serve on committees, how to come to us and do things. We're not very good at getting off home court and going out and seeing what's going on in the community. How do we actually work with those sorts of people on their own terms? I have a friend who does amazing ministry among Latinx immigrants, and when people want to go see what they want techniques to fix things. And what he does is he introduces them to emergency room nurses, to the folk healer, to all the people who have lots of contact, and he lets them talk about lived realities on the ground. That's where then I think the connection, the practices really take on life.
Any other comment on that from anyone?
I actually want to put a little bit of pressure back on us for a second. Right? And so what do I mean by that? Many of these studies have come out about the high numbers of depression, suicide, alcoholism, and also the 5 years being the kind of max that people are, able to maintain a career in ministry before they're opting for other things, right? 5 years seems to be the average number there. And these are realities that we have to take seriously, particularly as it relates to the emotional, mental health of those of us in the profession. Yes. And we also have to be serious in our conversations with our students and with one another, talk about connections, about our expectations of the call and of the vocation. Because one has to wonder sometimes if some of our disappointment and depression are a result of a misalignment between our expectations and what we expected from these careers, and what the reality is that we have to deal with on a daily basis. The example that Brother Christian gave, if we're honest, we know that that's all too common of an example. Every day we teach students that are on their way to be the next $1 million evangelist. Every day, we have young people that are going to seminary that they are going to become, or they're going to become the next tall steeple pastor with a vacation home and a great travel budget. Right? And so this works across denominations. It works across racial and ethnic lines. Reinhold Niebuhr has a great line it's right in the middle of Moral Man and Moral Society. He says, privileges make liars out of all men. And sometimes, there are times, and that is one of the reasons that I think that a lot of us as clergy and a lot of us don't like engaging one another. Because to engage one another, we have to have levels of transparency. And if we're lying to ourselves about why we're involved, we have to lie to one another. And so it's therefore easier just to live in isolation. And I can say, and this is the good news, I can say that one of the beautiful realities that I've encountered in recent years, colleagues, friends, strangers showing up or calling me who have served in ministry for 10, 15, 20 years and had certain expectations, tapped out, but yet have found a real call. And now are wanting to hit the reset button and start over with something that's really getting them up in the morning. And that's a beautiful thing.
That is a beautiful thing. Thank you. I'd like for each of you to say a word or an experience about the next question that I'm going to ask here, which is, I mean, we're kind of moving this little panel journey that we're doing after lunch, our after lunch drive here, from the beginning, which was to think about the diagnosis that we do to energy and inspiration, and now I want us to think about intervention to a degree. And that is in terms of two of the really great leadership educators who have given us such contribution to work with in that way. John Cotter, who, Jonathan, much as you said, one of the parts of leading change and leading through change is caring for the lost. You gotta care for those folks who are afraid and who really experience fear. But then I want to put that together with Ron Heifetz, who is perhaps the kind of grandparent of thinking about adaptive leadership, who says that one of the points of intervention and one of the responsibilities of leaders while caring for the lost and caring for oneself is he uses the image of turning up the heat under a cauldron, and that's a responsibility of leadership, but you've got to turn it up so that the bubbling happens, the thing cooks, and at the same time it can't boil over. So what I'd like from you all is to that both of those, particularly the kind of cauldron metaphor there and image. What do you think is the point now where and how, or an experience you have had of where and how we need to or are turning up the heat in important ways so that there can be intervention to a gospel intervention and an intervention against the powers and principalities that confront us? So go to the cauldron. This is actually now turning into like the Food Channel, you know, one of those cooking shows where we have a couple of minutes to cook and decide how we do it. Who wants to go first here? Yes, Christine.
I think I understand your question correctly, but it's okay if I don't. I like what I'm going to say.
That's the point.
So one of the things that's interesting to me, I grew up in a ministry family. My family's like 8 generations Church of God in Christ or something like that. And so Kojic bishops all up the line. And I guess I knew I was going to go into ministry of some sort. And I think I thought that ministry was the way to be radical in the world. And that was going to be the pathway for me. And I think what I learned is that I have to make my own radical way within ministry, because ministry isn't necessarily going to carve that path out for me. It's not countercultural enough. It's so wrapped up in so many of the problematic institutions in our society, and power and money and all the things. And so I've really had to deconstruct how I even think about my time and my efforts. Because I realized maybe 3 years ago now that so much of my justice work was done out of agnosticism. Even though I claimed to be a believer, I was making decisions based on the fear that if I don't say it, it won't get said. If I don't go, no one will. If I don't do it, it won't get done. And I realized that that's an easy trap to get into in ministry of any sorts, but I think specifically justice work, because there's always a problem. Someone's always bleeding. There's always a crisis. And I realized how small my understanding of God is, and how disconnected I was from the abundance of God and the community of folks who are doing this work. And that a major shift that happened for me as a result of that is changing my entire work schedule. I read a book at the, I have a bajillion spiritual practices that help me stay knit together, but one of them is I talk every single day with a 69-year-old person who's Latinx, who does anti-racism work from the Buddhist perspective on the ground, and has been doing it for about 40 years. And we talk every day, and they often make book recommendations, and I just read them. No questions asked. And I read a book that they recommended on the Ohlone Indians, a tribelet in the Bay Area a couple hundred years ago. And on their average work week, they worked 19 hours of industrial work, basket weaving, hunting, cooking, cleaning. The rest of their day was full of spiritual and community formation. And I realized that my 80-hour work weeks of writing and speaking and protesting and meeting everyone's needs were really coming out of this lack of connection to abundance and community. And so I've sort of rearranged my life to meet that. And that has meant saying no to empire in a lot of ways. That has meant saying no to opportunities or promotions. But that's been really transformative for me.
Thank you. So that sounds kind of like a story of turning up the fire on yourself, in fact.
Yeah, and inviting other people into it.
And inviting other people into it. Thank you. Christian.
Just to chime in here, you know, I think we've all kind of had that kind of sincere idealism at some point, and then it gets vanquished because, like Bill was saying early on, you realize the importance of preserving the institution, and as Greg was referring to, it's you know, it's easier to repair an institution than build one from the ground up or, you know, reconstruct it. But it is disconcerting, right? To take all of that energy and hopefulness and all of a sudden put it in this cauldron, this vessel that must cook slowly, right? Because, you know, you can cook a live animal. Somebody gave me this analogy. It was like a crab or a frog or something. A lobster. If you turn the fire, you got to boil them, right? If it's hot, you can't just drop them in the hot pot. You got to turn it. If they stay in the pot long enough, they'll cook before they know it. And, you know, they were talking about ministry. But, you know, certainly if we were to reverse that and say, well, that's what we're trying to do with society, right? I think there's something to be said for going about it in kind of a thoughtful way than taking a sword and, you know, lopping off heads and, you know, kicking down doors, as Biggie Smalls said, waving the fofo. You know, it's more thoughtful and respectful and mindful of people and their vulnerabilities, as was discussed, and I can't remember who discussed it. I think it was Jonathan, that people are afraid, you know, and being mindful that this is not about us, but it's about loss. Is Frida still here? Okay, she had to go. Frida and I sit on the City of Detroit Ethics Board together. And when we first started, they said, you have power over any elected official in the City of Detroit, including the mayor. You can bring charges against them. And I said, wow, you know, what am I going to do with this power? You know, I can't wait to get at this, and we're going to get this city together, and we're going to bring moral accountability. And I tell you, those meetings, sometimes if I had the choice of jumping out of a window and spending one more hour going over all of these documents, and it seems like we do more to say what we're not going to do rather than what we are going to do, right? But I realize it's the power of restraint, that anybody who's got real power, you have to exercise restraint. So that's kind of the balance as we attempt to turn up the fire, radically, finding that ability to use restraint and respectfulness and civility, at the same time trying to do something really novel and radical and progressive.
Thank you. Anyone else about their vessel? One of the pedagogical techniques that Ron Heifetz uses is, which can be very unnerving if you're not ready to do this in terms of your own adaptive kind of courage and capacity, is he will ask you, some of you may have been in things at JFK or whatever with him when he was doing that, where he will ask you to bring with you a hymn, a text, or a poem, or something that is not of your own writing necessarily, although it can be, and then to sing it or to read it in a way that holds the conviction that you have in your heart. The belief being that conviction is part of what takes you into the very core of your leadership in that way. And then I mean, that's nice, isn't it? But then the unnerving part is that he works with you individually in front of God and everybody else in order to have you sing it and say it and own it and that sort of thing. And I'm not going to do that right now. Rather, I'd like to ask for those of you who are interested, what's the hymn, what's the scriptural text, what's the word from a great poet or a great grandmother that you would bring to that occasion and bring to this occasion and want to shout out in that way because it's so informed your soul and your leadership?
Well, I sign everything. Official, unofficial, emails, contracts, one love. LUV, one LUV. The LUV just because I'm just a jazzy cat like that.
That's interesting.
And many people think it's from Bob Marley or from a bad cruise line commercial, but it's actually a book by the great educator Benjamin Elijah Mays, former president of Morehouse College, seeking to be Christian in race relations. And he begins a chapter with the line, "The love of God and the love," his language, "the love of man are one love." So the love of God and the love of humanity are one love. That's for me. It's that primacy of the moral and the spiritual. And that's the primacy of the moral and spiritual. How can we say we love a God that we've never seen and forget to say we love the one who we walk beside each and every day? And that, in terms of shaping and guiding my moral framework of how I keep track of others' humanity, particularly across lines of difference. They understand that everybody is just a child of God trying to love right and live right. And so it causes some epistemic humility on my part.
Thank you. I don't want to inhibit anyone from singing, you understand. So if what you bring in your heart you want to sing too, you should feel free. Greg?
I am not going to sing. I've got more musicians in my family than you could count, and I'm not allowed to sing even in the shower. And I don't remember lyrics. It's the other weird thing that I can't remember them for some reason. But what I was, after Jonathan just said that, I thought, well, that sums it up. But I would just lift up the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness. And the reason for that actually is that not only is it a great hymn, but it was shaped for me on September 11th, 2001. When the planes went into the towers, pretty quickly I realized we needed to have a prayer service at the Divinity School. So at 10 o'clock, I sent out a note that we'd have prayer service at the end of classes at noon. And then I thought, I don't have a clue what we're going to do in the prayer service. And so I did the only thing I could think of that might help was I called a couple wiser people to ask for advice, one of whom is my wife. And so I said, you got any thoughts? And she said, let's open with Great is Thy Faithfulness. I said, that doesn't sound right. And she knew all the lyrics to the hymn. And she said, and besides, it's from Lamentations 3. And I was like, oh, of course, I knew that. She was raised Baptist, so she knew her Bible. I was raised Methodist and didn't have a clue. And then I got out the hymnal to look at the words after she recited them, and I was looking at it and went, oh, that's right, that's beautiful. And we opened up the prayer service, and the roof was blown off because that hymn gave voice to that both affirmation and plea for God's faithfulness in the midst of brokenness and in the midst of lamentation.
Thank you.
Over the past year, I've started to write bad poetry because anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. And that private prayer time is really important to me. And I'll read one that comes back to me, and it's a prayer. It's a poetic prayer. And it picks up on some themes. That's why it just came to mind. And the title of it is The God Who Waits. When I made you into something I could hold in my hands, you refused to be held. Slipping my grasp, you held me in your mercy. When I tried to earn your acceptance, you left me with silence. Ignoring my ambition, you asked only for my heart. When I walked the labyrinth of my desires, you led me in endless circles, waiting for my restlessness to end in surrender. When I filled myself with knowledge, you covered yourself in mystery, waiting to fill my emptiness with your love. When I ran into the darkness, your light shined on my back, waiting for me to show you my face. When I sacrificed my life on countless altars, you received no offering, waiting until I had nothing left to give but myself. You are a God who waits, so that lost I might find you, exhausted I might rest in you, empty I might be filled with you, reconciled I might be made new, broken I might learn compassion.
Thank you. That's psalmody, as a matter of fact. Thank you. We're coming to our conclusion here, although there will be a chance for dialogue, as this has been dialogue and conversation in a sense here. It's going to actually be expanded as we do the time together, which follows. I'm not sure what the schedule is, but we'll find that out. Perhaps a break and making our way back to the other building. But I think that I used to say of our friends at the Lilly Endowment, in fact, that I finally figured out that their real religion was evaluation, and that's important for people who do the kind of work that they do. And we've done this journey in our panel here of moving through important things like energy and intervention. And I want us to do an evaluative final word here, if each of you would be willing to do so, which is not an evaluation of this conversation or of the conference, but an evaluative word of where you see the possibility, or if you want to use a word like that, or challenge of where we stand right now in moving ahead as leaders in the church. In no particular order. A word or a phrase at most. we, as however you want to define what this church is and who the community is.
And I say this with all due respect, because this is just something I'm wrestling with, and I'm going to have to wrestle with it, particularly as I take on this new role as a dean, right? But I've just become somewhat nauseated by the term leadership as it relates to the Christian church, right? I cited this earlier, right? You know, King's words that everybody has the capacity to be great because everybody has the capacity to serve. And so much of our talk about leadership, particularly at this late capitalist, post-industrial, neoliberal, concentration of resources, reemergence of a dominant plutocratic class in American society. When we talk about leadership, we're talking about really people who are being served rather than being called to serve. And people who want to lead but don't want to love. And so we need a serious reevaluation of values. Because if we're going to be an ecclesia, a community that's called out, then we just cannot be a religious variant or example of gross economic resource inequality led by a professional class of religious leaders that are alienated from a suffering humanity that needs us to roll up our sleeves and to empathize, not be great, but good.
Thank you, Jonathan. That may be a final word, but I also want everyone to have an opportunity for a word. That's such an accountability word.
Well, cosign. And also, I think I'll add that if there is a new leadership that emerges, it won't look anything like the current one. And I was speaking at, I think it was, I can't remember, but I think it was Eastern Mennonite Seminary, and a student asked how he could go about creating a multi-ethnic, multiracial church, a white student at EMU, at the seminary, and I said, you can't. And you should have seen the president, just having a heart attack. Because here I was telling all of his students, you probably are not qualified to do the next great work of the church. It won't be you. The most innovative, resourceful, effective, dollar for dollar work that's being done is being done by women of color in the global South who are trivocational. So it's not going to look like the people who are getting MDivs. That's not the leadership.
Thank you.
In the 4th century, Julian the Apostate was a Roman emperor, and he starts talking to his followers in the empire, and he says, these Christians around here are making us look bad because they're doing all sorts of stuff to help widows, orphans, the poor, creating hospitals, doing all sorts of crazy things, but they're making us look bad. We'd better up our game to do what these Christians are doing. It's what my colleague at Duke, Kevin Rowe, calls the surprise of Christianity in the early church. That there was all this new innovative work happening that the Roman Empire found surprising and unnerving and was part of what caused the growth. So I would hope that over the next 25 years, even in the U.S., Christianity might become surprising again.
Family. And you think about all of the people that are in your family, from the guttermost to the uttermost. Your family is your family. And when Jesus said, "Woman, behold your son, son, behold your mother," he expanded our understanding of what family is when all of the believers had everything in common at the birth of the church. That's the concept and construct that is most meaningful to me, and I pray that I'm able to perpetuate in some way. Not this understanding, not the simplistic and myopic understanding of what family is, although I know churches are made up of families. I'm talking about the universal family, sisters and brothers, mothers and fathers in faith, and people from every background, this whole inhabited earth. That to me is what the church and really what life in the Spirit is all about.
Nice. I guess I have more patience with uncertainty and with the mystery. I never expected that I would become the rector of a parish and suddenly it would start to grow out of nowhere. And I never expected that there would be these micro moments in the midst of parish life which would be so catalytic to my own spirituality, and that I would have so much incredible, such an incredibly flourishing experience both within my community and outside of my community. And I never expected that I would like anything from Harvard. But I like you, Dr. Walton. So, I mean, I think that what I'm hitting into my mid-50s, and I just don't think I have the predictive powers that I had. And when I was in academics, I thought I knew it was going to happen. But God has continued to surprise me. And I look at the demographics, and they're not good around me, but then my church is growing. And I had an interesting experience with a bishop in Canada, because I had just done this major recruiting tour as a dean, and I just looked and I said, this church is going to hit the skids. We're going to die. And I told him at the table, we were having dinner, and he was just getting ready for retirement, and he began to sing this bizarre evangelical song. Surprise, surprise, God is a surprise, hidden from the wise, but right before your eyes. Surprise, surprise, God is a surprise. Open up your eyes and see. And it was just as bad. And so then I was listening to it, and I was thinking and it was at that moment I was like, yeah, holy shit. Right. And then he kept on singing it, and then I started tearing up. I'm like, cut it out, man. Let me alone in my negativity. and that little bit, that surprise, that's what I've come to see where God works miracles. Like when I think a relationship is dead, and God comes in, and all of a sudden it's alive. Yeah. And that's happened again and again, and I have to hold on to those things, and who knows what the future will be. It will be different, has to be, but I don't think we're going to have any certainty. I'm not sure if the institution is going to collapse. I don't think that that's the case, because I know from Detroit how important institutions have been in every community. So I don't think I can predict.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you for bringing us back to one of the kind of definitions of a serving sort of leadership, which is to have your eyes open. We came back to diagnosis after we have been to intervention in this particular conversation and journey right now. Again, I think we began with applause, and we should conclude this with applause.